Welcome to a very special edition of 1onONE. We're living in the midst of a political landscape in America like we've never seen. The rhetoric and attacks from both sides of the aisle are fierce. And at the center of this intense political discourse is one man, Donald J. Trump. In a style often called brash and irreverent, despite his approach, Trump has found an unlikely ally in the evangelical community. Today, Damon Davis sits down with the founder and CEO of Charisma Media, Mr. Strang. He's here today to share never-before insights from his new book, Trump Aftershock. Get ready to go deep into the Trump agenda and decide for yourself just how much God is or isn't using this political maverick to advance his kingdom. Trump Aftershock, right here. This is 1onONE with Damon Davis and Strang.
Strang, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you. It's an honor.
Well, it's a privilege to sit down with you and to talk about this very intriguing subject. Now, this is not obviously your first book. You have written several. And for those that do not know who Strang is, I want to take just a few minutes if we can and give us an introduction to you. You're a publisher.
Well, I'm best known for Charisma magazine.
Yes.
I started in 1975, believe it or not, and I've been covering the charismatic movement. But I was trained as a journalist, so I approached things as a journalist. And when this last election rolled around, I ended up endorsing President Trump. And after the election, I went to the election night party, and then I went to the inauguration. And so I was very involved, and I noticed that most of the books that were coming out about Trump didn't even mention the Christian vote, which was really pivotal to his election. And so I thought, we need to publish a book. And I'm a book publisher, as you know. So I published your book, and we've published over 3,000 books.
Wow.
But instead of recruiting someone to write the book, God and Donald Trump, I did it myself.
Yeah, that was your first book on the subject of Trump.
That's right.
We're not here to talk about God and Donald Trump. Obviously, we're going to talk about Donald Trump. God's going to have part of it. But we're here to talk about Trump Aftershock, which is your new book. But just before we get into that, give us a little snapshot of God and Donald Trump, that first book. What was it about? Well,
as a Christian, you know, I believe that God is involved with everything. That is not part of our secular culture.
Sure.
But yet there were prophets that prophesied that this very unlikely man would be raised up, and they compared him to King Cyrus in the Old Testament, you know, the pagan king that God used to send the Jews back to Jerusalem. What I've said so many times when I've been interviewed, and I've done a lot of interviews, is that millions of Christians were praying because they felt that the country was going in the wrong direction. I felt that way.
Sure.
You know, with all the things the Supreme Court was doing and the culture, and that God raised up a very unlikely person, someone we didn't expect and someone we didn't even like. I was a Ted Cruz guy to start with because, as you probably know, Ted is a strong Christian, and I liked Ted Cruz because he was strong, and I knew he could stand up to all the stuff that was going on in Washington. But as time has proven, President Trump is 10 times stronger than Ted Cruz. I'm just amazed. They throw everything at him every single day, and yet he survives.
Sure.
And he even seems to thrive on it.
So I know I wouldn't be remiss in saying that many people are concerned about the abrasive nature of the man, and yet we see results. I would imagine you had to get your arms wrapped around and your head wrapped around deciphering between what the media was saying about the man and what you experienced for yourself.
You're absolutely right. And if you'll remember, there were 17 candidates, and I had met 5 of them, and there were several very good Christians. And while we're not electing a pastor-in-chief,
exactly,
you know, I want to support people that I believe in their values. But as time passed, we were in a very serious situation. The candidate on the other side, Hillary Clinton, I believe, is one of the most corrupt people ever to run for president. So in our two-party system, we didn't have much of a choice. For me, hearing the different pastors compare him to Cyrus in the Old Testament, I thought if God can use a pagan king, he can use Donald Trump. Plus, I began to understand that Donald Trump had changed. About 10 or 15 years ago, he started watching Christian television.
Wow.
Kenneth Copeland says that he told him that he watched him all the time. Same thing with David Jeremiah.
Wow.
And most of your viewers would know that he was close to Paula White.
Yeah.
Well, I knew Paula White back then. I published her books.
Sure.
And I remember her telling us that her secretary got a call from a New York businessman, celebrity named Donald Trump. She came into her office and said, "You won't believe who's on the phone." Well, she took the call, and Donald Trump said, "I watch you late at night, and I've got some questions about God. Will you meet with me?" And a friendship ensued. Now, this was like maybe 15 years ago, but I believe that Donald Trump changed. In fact, I was on CNN, and they were asking me why I changed my mind from Ted Cruz to someone like Donald Trump, who, you know, I knew all this stuff in the media, and I said on live TV, "I believe he's changed." And she said, "How does he change?" And I said, "I believe he's accepted Christ."
Wow.
And I was thinking, I can't believe I just said that. So I quickly said, I don't know that firsthand, but in God and Donald Trump, I do quote several people who have prayed with the president. Now, he doesn't act like a choir boy.
Right.
He uses a few words that my mother used to wash my mouth out with soap if I used. You know, it's like Dr. Dobson says, he's a baby Christian, but he seems to appreciate people praying for him, and he seems to like the evangelical community. He seems to respect pastors, and he has become a champion for Christian rights. I mean, look what he did with Andrew Brunson. He made an international incident over one spirit-filled missionary that was trying to spread the gospel in that Muslim country. And when he put sanctions on Turkey, their lira plummeted. That's their currency. Their stock market plummeted, and they finally gave in and gave this man his freedom. You know, what other president has done that? And of course, you know, a lot of the other things in terms of supporting Israel, moving the embassy, we could go right down the line. But there are a lot of things going on in America beyond the things that you and I as Christians think are important.
Sure.
So and I deal with these in Trump Aftershock.
Sure, and a lot of people, they don't know a lot of the facts and the things you're referencing. I want to play a real quick clip before we get into a discussion on your book. And this is what we saw play out in the media when the man was elected president. Nobody expected it. Well, some did, but the media certainly did not. Watch this, we'll be right back.
Clinton or Trump? It's time for America to decide.
Here's the map as it stands right now, where our polling has shown Hillary Clinton has had some sort of a lead.
This map looks better for Donald Trump today than it did yesterday, but he still faces an extraordinarily steep hill.
Donald Trump will win the state of Ohio, a big one here.
And CNN projects Donald Trump will carry the state of Florida.
Donald Trump has won the state of Pennsylvania.
Pretty dramatic change in your forecast now.
And the point right now, at this point in the evening, is what's her possible path?
Wow. Amazing how it's flipped, hasn't it?
Yeah.
We got a lot of people on the edge of their seats right now.
Everybody take a deep breath.
Donald Trump wins Wisconsin, surpassing the 270 electoral votes he would need to take the presidency.
Donald Trump will be the 45th president of the United States, winning the most unreal, surreal election we have ever seen.
What a night!
And a complete earthquake.
We're covering a story that no one saw coming.
Well, my crystal ball's been shattered into atoms here because I predicted the exact opposite of what happened.
It's my honor. It was an amazing evening, and I love this country. Thank you. Thank you very much.
If you look at that, what we're seeing is we're seeing shock, utter shock. No one expected the man to win, and yet he did.
Well, I thought he was going to win, and I flew up for the election night party in New York City.
Sure.
I was a little nervous, I'll admit, but there were Christian prophets who prophesied that he'd win against all odds. Now, prophecy is very controversial even in Christian circles, and of course secular people don't know what to think of it at all. Yet these people said that God was raising up Donald Trump to be president against all odds, and it happened. So I thought on the chance it would happen, I wanted to be up there, and it was a historic moment. And I believe that the country shifted. And if Donald Trump had done nothing more than stop Hillary Clinton, which in my opinion, things would have gotten worse and worse and worse. But there was a shift. Look, he's put Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court. And so I think the direction of the court is going to change now because they were really legislating from the bench. Look at all these things that have been imposed in our country with just one or two justices who are the swing vote deciding it. It's never voted by the legislature or by the people. And Donald Trump has made a shift. But he has done one thing after another. The economy has boomed, even though the pundits said it wouldn't. Countries around the world respect America again after President Obama was apologizing and saying leading from behind. Your viewers know all this kind of stuff. And these are things that I try to document in my book, Trump Aftershock. I called these the aftershocks, where his election was the earthquake, and these are all the things that have happened since then. Look how he has led in diplomacy with North Korea. Now, time will tell if that really works out, but at least he got Kim Jong-un to the negotiating table.
Historical.
Nobody else has done that.
Historical.
And we can go right down the line, and these things are documented. Now, a lot of people said he would be an utter failure as a president because so many people didn't like him since he's kind of crude, since he had no experience. They were predicting that the stock market would plummet. The stock market has never been higher.
True.
There's a lot of things about the economy. You know, we've had good economies in the past, but this is actually a record economy in many, many ways. The unemployment rate has come down.
True.
I call these all aftershocks. It's a storytelling technique to tell the story of what's happened with this presidency. And I believe that God has raised up this man. This is my personal opinion. God has always used imperfect leaders. And I go into this, and really both books, we deal with it to some extent. He used Abraham, who is not perfect at all.
Well said.
How about David?
Well said.
Who actually had a man killed.
Solomon.
Solomon wasn't perfect at all. Even the Apostle Paul was not. But the whole essence of Christianity is that God changes lives. And they asked me, how can evangelicals support somebody so imperfect? And I said, that's the whole essence of Christianity. I said, everyone who has accepted Christ has been forgiven of things that they would not like to be spread across the front pages of the newspapers.
True. But you believe this is a book every single believer should have. Why?
Well, that's a good question. First of all, it helps people to connect the dots. And Christians need to understand what's going on in the country. But a few days ago, I spoke at a Christian conference, and they had me talk about my book. And I wanted to relate to those people like you just talked about. I didn't want to just talk politics. But I said, here's a man who nobody would have ever thought would be president of the United States, yet God used him. And I said, can God use you? You know, you may feel like you have no future. 10 years ago, would he have thought he was going to be president?
Right.
They throw everything but the kitchen sink at him, and he survives. A lot of us feel like life is throwing everything at us.
Well said.
So he's an inspiration of nothing else, and we can see God's hand at work. Don't we want to see God's hand at work? And you're not going to see that watching secular TV. You're just not. So this is giving information, documentation. There's 542 footnotes. It's very well researched, yet it's readable. People say that it's a fast read, it's an interesting read, it helped them to understand, it kept them engaged, because we tell stories. We tell stories about Trump, and we tell stories about how his policies are impacting average people.
Some people feel that instead of being engaged in the conversation, this is the time to be off the battlefield and to just focus on us and Jesus. But you're suggesting that people need to be engaged.
Kenneth Copeland told me, I interviewed him about this, and he said that part of the reason that we're in the mess we're in is because Christians have been passive, just like you described. They'll think, you know, we've had it pretty good in this country for a long time. You know, even the people who don't go to church and live like the devil, like my parents used to say when I was growing up, even they had kind of a basic understanding and respect for God, and even if they were living like the devil, they sort of knew they were doing something wrong. But a lot of that is out the window. People are biblically illiterate, And Christians who tend to be nice people and are busy raising their kids and going to work and all that kind of stuff, kind of leave it to someone else. So in the 1960s, when the Supreme Court ruled that Bible reading was unconstitutional and prayer in the schools was unconstitutional, two different Supreme Court rulings, Christians just stood back like there was nothing they could have done. In hindsight, there should have been a great
rising up of voices.
Exactly. In fact, something could have been done. We could have passed a constitutional amendment saying that Bible reading and prayer in schools was constitutional. You know, in 1855, the Dred Scott decision, the Supreme Court ruled that slavery was constitutional. What happened just a few years later? A bloody civil war to end slavery, and then afterwards, several constitutional amendments. Slavery is no longer constitutional. That could have happened in hindsight. But people just said, well, you know, there's nothing we can do. And it was like one thing, it became like dominoes. And I believe that Donald Trump is at least stemming the tide. But Christians have to stand up in the culture. We have to stand for what's right. We have to vote our consciences. We have to vote for godly values.
Well, you're illustrating a fascinating point, and that is that the evangelical community, the body of believers, have been looking for someone to step into that office, to advance initiatives that protect what we believe. The opposite is true. If we look at what happened prior to this election, an office was held by a body of people that were working intentionally and aggressively to erode our values. And I'm talking core values. We look at what's happened where God has been removed from the monuments, Scripture being erased. We look at history books being rewritten. And we look at the rise of other faiths on the scene and the quieting of our voice. And now we have a man that's actually advancing the battlefield in our favor. You would think that we would be rallying around the flag, so to speak. But we're not. It's a divided camp. People feel it's unpopular to say that they support Trump. They're almost intimidated to admit that they side with him on issues. But Steve, we cannot ignore the facts, can we? We cannot ignore the results of what's happened since the man took office. And you profile that in your book. And you document it. Who can argue with those facts?
Well, I hope a lot of readers agree with you. You know, I've said on secular TV that millions of Christians were praying, and God raised up someone we didn't expect and someone we didn't really like. A lot of people are timid to say that they support Donald Trump, but I think that's one of the reasons the polls were wrong with the election and even some of the elections that have happened since then. I believe that Americans are waking up, and part of it is how crazy the left has become. I don't even call it the Democrats anymore. This is not a political party thing. Both political parties are very, very imperfect, of course. But look how they trashed Judge Kavanaugh, who's got a wonderful record.
Nearly destroyed his life.
That's right. And I mean, they had all these opinions that he's written. They could have attacked him on a lot of things. They could find nothing. So they had to come up with a trumped up charge. Now, we have to believe that this lady that brought the charges really believed it, but there was not a shred of evidence. I mean, there are people who make things up in their minds. We're not here to talk about that. Thankfully, he got in. But that is happening more and more and more. Look at how they come into restaurants and attack people and are rude, and the mobs of people.
What are they afraid of? What are they looking to accomplish? Obviously to derail the man. Obviously,
well, it's not just Trump. You know, I'm assuming that most of the viewers are believers, or at least curious about the faith. They hate everything that we stand for, and the only thing that's really standing in their way, I'm talking about the far left secularists where anything goes, have sex with anybody, anytime, any place, you know, you want. And it's really only the Bible and biblical principles that's standing in their way. So I think they're trying to attack in any way they can. They would attack you and me if they felt that we were worthy of attack. And Donald Trump is taking it. He doesn't seem to mind. But they throw something at him every single day. And a lot of times they say, well, this is it. Finally, he's gone too far. And then he survives that, and the next day they throw something else at him. And of course, I document all of this in my book, Trump Aftershock.
Sure. I want people to get the book. I want them to read it. I want them to get it, and I want them to read it just so they're educated on what the facts are. And you document those facts. I want them to understand who the man is, because many of us have an opinion of the man, and we really don't know who the man is. We know what the media tells us about the man. But I really want people to understand the why they need to read this book. I would say, in this season, on the timeline of history, this might be the most important individual in office, certainly in our lifetime. I need you to give me a compelling reason why I need to take my time, invest my time to read this book.
Is because all of us need to see God's hand at work. Our secular culture, it just gives lip service to religion now and then, maybe when people are married or when they die or something. But God is at work. This is a battle against good and evil.
Do you really see it as that?
It's a battle against good and evil. It's not against Republican and Democrat.
If we are coming up against an opposing force that would like nothing else than for us to lose our religious freedoms, that it's going to take a wrecking ball to tear through that wall.
And Lance Wallnau called him a wrecking ball. I call him a disruptor. You know, this is why people are upset at him. He's disrupting things. He's disrupting the status quo. This is why the left has just gone crazy. They're just berserk. They've become a mob.
Sure.
And it's sad what's happening to our country. But I am beginning to see some shifts. There are people coming around. There are people who are recognizing the accomplishments, not just from a political point of view, but you know, the Bible tells us to pray so that we can have peaceful, godly lives.
Yeah.
And all of us want to have an economy that prospers, and we want to be strong militarily so that we don't have invaders coming into our country and all this kind of stuff. And I believe that Donald Trump is getting things on course, but he can't do it himself.
Got it.
All of us have to be willing to do our part. And one of the main things is, as believers, we can pray for him.
Got it.
Because there's a spiritual struggle in the heavenlies over our country and over this president, and we need to hold him up in prayer.
Steve, would you say, as we close out the show, that you are fully convinced that God opened the doorway and by his majestic hand put this man in office to do what needed to be done in this season? Do you believe that?
Absolutely, I believe it. And the Bible says that God puts leaders in place. Now, we don't understand that because there are a lot of leaders that get in place that are not godly. But I believe that this president is an answer to prayer. Now, could he go wrong? Of course. King Solomon went wrong at some point after he started off so good.
Sure.
You know, Donald Trump's a human being. We have to put our trust in God. But I believe as an American citizen and as a journalist and as a Christian that I need to be as supportive as I can of this president and his agenda. What else do we have? Who else do we have right now?
Or where else might we be if the disruption wasn't taking place? I want to thank you for being on the program, and I want to congratulate you for what you've done, not with just the magazine and the company and the media properties that you have and the many books that you've written, but most importantly for, how do I say it, having the courage to stand up and share the truth that maybe many of us don't understand. That takes a very bold man. And I would imagine that there were a lot of opposing voices, perhaps cautioning you to take a side, but you've taken one.
Listen, my staff tried to talk me out of writing the book.
Intriguing book, very informative, well documented, great stories, humor, but a lot of truth. Jerry Falwell wrote your foreword, and so many people, from Mike Huckabee to Todd Starnes, Richard Land, so many people are behind it. I want to thank you for writing it, and I want to encourage you to get it. This has been a very special edition of this program, and regardless of your position on the man, the President of the United States, regardless of your view of his character or what you think he might stand for, let me just encourage you to not allow the media to paint that picture. I think that we have to formulate our own opinion. That opinion has to be formulated based upon the facts. This book, Trump Aftershock, is a documented journey across the life and times of our president after the election. A man who stood up against all odds and faced significantly opposing forces that were on a mission to ensure that he did not succeed in delivering anything he promised to you. But it's time that we know the facts. And I would also say it is a tremendous story of courage that can be an inspiring one for every single one of us. I think that you'll take something away from the book that you can apply to your own life personally and corporately. Thank you so much, Damon Davis. Thank you for being part of the program. See you next time.
If Donald Trump's election was an earthquake, his accomplishments since taking office have been the aftershocks the world never saw coming. As a Christian, where do you stand on Trump? And do you know if it aligns with God's ultimate plan? Through hours of interviews with experts in politics, religion, and with Trump himself, one man is answering this question for the church. From the best-selling author of God and Donald Trump, Strang, comes the sequel, Trump Aftershock. In Trump Aftershock, Strang explores both the anticipated and unexpected effects of Trump on our culture from a Christian perspective. More importantly, this book cuts through the media's noise and reveals what they won't tell us, just how much Trump and his agenda will have a profound impact on the future of the church in America. In this easy read, Strang objectively helps you understand what our nation's most unlikely and unconventional president has accomplished. Hot off the press, call now to receive one of the first copies of this once-in-a-lifetime book. But that's not all. As a bonus to his one-on-one viewers, Damon wants you to have his complete and uncut interview with Strang. You only saw 22 minutes of Damon and Stephen's interview, but what you did not see on today's program may be the key you need to decide if you are on the right side of history and Donald Trump. Watch as Damon asks the hard questions of Strang. This discussion is not available anywhere else. Call now and receive the book and exclusive interview for your love gift of just $39.95. If you've ever wanted a clearer understanding of President Donald Trump, beyond the rhetoric, beyond the facade the media places in front of us on a daily basis, then you don't want to miss this opportunity. Bring home best-selling author Strang's new book, Trump Aftershock. The book is filled with not only an objective look at the man himself, but also a full-color section highlighting significant moments in the Trump presidency, plus graphs and charts illustrating the latest research and data on Trump's 500 days in office and keyed insight on what's to come that no one is talking about. All this, plus the uncut, in-depth and personal interview between Damon Davis and author Strang. Supplies are limited. Operators are standing by.